Welcome to Marketplace Tech Bytes, our weekly review of some of the biggest stories making headlines across the industry. I'm Safo, and this week we got a new Trump mobile service and smartphone, which will most likely be made, you guessed it, not in the USA. Also, prosecutors say the man accused of assassinating a lawmaker in Minnesota used online data brokers. We'll get into that. And there may be trouble in paradise in the union between OpenAI and Microsoft. And I'm joined by our regular contributor, Natasha Mascarenhas from the tech news site, The Information, for her take on these stories and more. Welcome, Natasha.
Thanks so much for having me. Happy to be here.
Well, happy to have you. And as always, we're going to start with our bite of the week. This is where we have our guest give us the number that tells us everything about the week in tech. A tough assignment. Natasha, what's your number?
Oh gosh, well this week may be the easiest bite I had to pick in quite a long time. This week I'm going to go with the number 100 to represent the size of the offers that Meta is giving talent at OpenAI and other AI labs to try and recruit away some of its best talent. And we're not talking 100K, we're talking 100 million. $100 million offers, sometimes in cash, being offered to top talent.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
What kind of so these are folks who are I'm assuming at the cream of the crop of the AI field that they're trying to
It's cream of the crop. It's a lot of researchers, scientists, but Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, did say on a podcast this week that a lot of the best talent isn't leaving as a result of these big offers. And so I am curious to see who ends up being poached and what we can find out about it. But yeah, no, definitely not the only rivalry we're going to be talking about on today's show.
$100 million, not enough to lure you away. I guess they're holding out for just a little bit more.
Definitely. Well, let's get into, he argues that there's a lot more that you can get over at OpenAI.
Well, that's fascinating. All right. Well, let's jump into our first story, and that's coming from the Trump Organization, which is owned by the president. It announced this week that it was getting into the wireless communications business, a mobile phone service, and a mobile plan, mobile phone and a mobile phone service. And that mobile phone, interestingly, of course, or maybe more obvious than interesting, is that it's gold colored. It is an Android device, and it retails for $500. And to be clear, the Trump Organization is lending the Trump name for this venture, and the venture is actually run by an outside company called T1 Mobile LLC. Here's Donald Trump Jr. at the unveiling.
Today, we're here to introduce Trump Mobile. We're going to be introducing an entire package of products that people can come, they can get telemedicine on their phone for one flat monthly fee, roadside assistance in their cars, unlimited texting to 100 countries around the world.
Well, that's a lot in one flat monthly fee. And then as the New York Times pointed out, that fee, which is $47.45, which is, 47th president, 45th president. Anyway, they say that's the monthly fee. The New York Times says you can't possibly offer telemedicine for that price. Just telemedicine alone is probably more than that. Another hiccup, Washington Post reporter tried to sign up for this service. They took her money, but she couldn't get it to activate. And also it costs more than $47.45. And the phone itself, the Trump administration says, the Trump Organization says it's $500 and it's made in the United States. But a lot of experts are not buying that. And that's where I'd like to focus here, because where a smartphone is made is a big thing for the US economy in general. And Natasha, why are experts so doubtful that the Trump phone is manufactured in the United States?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, as my colleagues at The Information pointed out, currently there's just one smartphone for sale that meets the FTC standards to label itself as a made in the USA phone. And that's according to 404 Media. The device has less memory and a worse camera than the Trump phone. And that one retails for $2,000, the one that's certified to be made, to be advertised as made in the USA. And so the idea that the Trump administration could produce a smartphone that offers all the things that we just watched, has a lot of analysts, experts scratching their head. And of course, to your point, this really comes in the backdrop of the Trump administration, Trump specifically really calling on Apple to move its manufacturing to the United States, slapping it with tariffs if it does have iPhones that are not made in the US. And so, Apple is trying to do it. And Trump is trying to do it first.
And it's very difficult to do because
It's very difficult to do because a lot of the technology and manufacturing is really being outsourced to different parts of the world. I mean, Apple's attempt at diversifying some of its manufacturing has seen it creating plants in India, not the United States. And that comes from everywhere from labor costs to really like the chips that are powering these phones are still largely, being produced overseas in China, India, Taiwan, all over the world.
And then there's this question of regulation, right? If you're running a mobile phone service, you are very heavily regulated by the United States government. Also, we have tariffs that apply for various products, potentially semiconductors coming down the line. Electronics are currently exempt, but they may not be for long with the China tariffs issue. So how does all of that play into the fact that the president may personally benefit from a mobile phone venture?
Yeah, I mean, like you pointed out, there are already struggles towards signing up for this kind of service. And so I think the jury is out on how effective the product will be in actually getting mass scale. But yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people are bringing up the possible ethical concerns of, on one hand, 1 month ago, Trump telling Tim Cook of Apple that they expect their iPhones to be sold in the United States, manufactured, diversifying to India isn't good enough. Otherwise, if you don't, tariffs will be hit on Apple. 1 month later, or even less than a month later, announcing an effort like this that sort of would be an alternative, and one that is, to your point, like quite cheap to some of this. So yeah, there's a lot of questions around if this will be ethical and if this will be effective.
All right, let's move on to our next topic, which is something that has really concerned and I think a lot of us in this last week, and that is the assassination of a Minnesota state representative, and that's Melissa Hortman and her husband, Mark. They were shot and killed in their home last weekend. Prosecutors said the alleged assassin, Vance Bolter, used online people search websites, data brokers, to find home addresses of numerous intended targets. Dozens of lawmakers were apparently on this list. And that's renewing scrutiny over these online data brokers. And there's talks of potential legislation even. So I wanted to first get into, what are these data brokers? How do they work?
Yeah, so using AI and honestly, a lot of partnerships between the sellers that we all use and put our credit card information on, or the websites where we click accept cookies, data brokers sort of can rapidly scrape, clean, and standardize data around individuals and then sell access to that data. And so everything from, a new startup that's looking to understand a better persona to sell to a bad actor, to someone who intends to, use the information and then inflict harm, can sort of pay up and get access to this information. There are dozens, if not hundreds, of data brokers online that are aggregating data, so much so that there's even startups that have popped up to help you get your information off as a full-time job. So, these websites are all over the place and tracking everything from your address and phone number to even your political affiliation and what your salary could be like.
So they're aggregating data that's public and data that's not public?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, a lot of it is from things like public records, social media. But, there has been a lot of questions around surveillance without permission. And I hear from AI researchers, from people in the AI world a lot, that as AI gets better, it's looking to sort of infer missing tributes. Like, okay, can I track all of what Natasha Mascarenhas has said online and try to understand what her political leaning is, and then use that information to sort of fill out the rest of her profile? I think that's a scary and newer, way we're seeing data tracked.
And this information is readily available for anyone to purchase? Like, you could literally go to a site, take out your credit card and get it?
It definitely varies on the person, but yeah, you can definitely go to a website, put out your credit card, and get information.
And what kind of restrictions are in place, if any, on this kind of business?
That's, it's a good question. And it's one that I think has come up every time we see a news story where there was someone hurt due to the ability to access their information online. Even a few months ago, I was reading about police looking for more safeguards around it. I truly know that there's been a lot of attempts for tighter oversight over how people's information is shared online. But the best I've seen is really websites that are looking that and sort of ways that you can opt out as an individual from these websites. So technically, you see your information online, they have to offer you some level of opting out. And that can help in some ways. But I mean, it's imperfect. And that's why we're seeing legislation show up.
And speaking of legislation, Minnesota Senator Amy Klobuchar had a bill to kind of reduce the amount of access to elected officials' data, at least to protect elected officials, and that didn't pass. Actually, do we know why, or what the arguments would be for preventing that kind of legislation from passing?
I don't know exactly why it didn't pass, but I mean, like I said, it's been something that there's been a lot of legislation and attempts to address the threat. Um, you know, like I said, it's been an ongoing concern for a long time. And I think one version of this that we've seen is, okay, can we restrict specific entities from selling specific information? So one version of the law, and this might be because just speculating here, one idea could be, okay, is that too broad? One law that was passed in 2022 was sort of passing information for law enforcement officials to be exactly personally identifiable information be sold from companies. But again, I mean, it's a sort of imperfect game, and it's the biggest question. It's one of the biggest debates that happens on the internet and sort of online privacy.
And it seems like an example of the law and regulators not having caught up to the speed of the internet. And speaking of which, AI. Let's talk about the final topic here is something that's got tongues wagging in Silicon Valley, and that is the honeymoon that may be over between OpenAI and Microsoft. The Wall Street Journal says the two sides are caught up in difficult negotiations that are in danger of boiling over into open conflict. So, Natasha, what are these negotiations and what's the conflict about?
Yeah, definitely. So one thing to really understand is that these two companies used to be partners before they became rivals. Over time, though, they've started to sort of compete in areas such as selling AI to enterprises. They're competing with coding products. The latest debate is really that OpenAI wants to convert its structure. As a result, it wants to, ask Microsoft, which currently has a 49% stake in the business, to change that stake to 33%. This would give OpenAI more flexibility to work with other cloud providers. It would completely change the ability for OpenAI to sort of take in more of its revenue cut. And it's something that it's telling investors that it really intends to sort of pocket more of that investment. But, Microsoft and OpenAI have been in negotiations for nearly 8 months trying to figure out a version of this that feels right. Let's, just to explain the stakes a little bit, the stock that Microsoft currently holds in OpenAI's for profit entitles it to around like 120 billion in cut of future profits. So the money on the table is huge, but for OpenAI to really, what it says, get the power it needs, be able to sort of restructure efficiently, it's looking to break things up. And so the latest news, like you mentioned, the Wall Street Journal reports that in these negotiations, some OpenAI officials have been saying that they might take the quote nuclear option and complain to antitrust regulators to look over that contractual obligation that they made when the first two companies got in business together and see if there's a way to sort of navigate, the breakup that's not breaking up.
And what was that initial deal? What was the contractual agreement between the two, and how has that worked out? What do they each get for what does each side get out of it?
Yeah, I mean, so right now, OpenAI has agreed to share 20% of its revenue with Microsoft through 2030. That is one of the biggest kind of aspects of the deal to pay attention to, because that's the same year that OpenAI is projecting it'll hit, very significant billions, hundreds of billions in revenue. As a result of, in return, OpenAI got a lot of money, and has sort of Microsoft is what a lot of people see as the reason that OpenAI has been able to hit such magnificent scale since launching, its product less than 10 years ago. So the deal really started with a very classic investment deal in some ways. We will give you a lot of money. In return, we will get a percent of your revenue and own a percent of your stake.
It's interesting to see how that evolves, because what we're talking about here is OpenAI's belief in artificial general intelligence and the future of how much they think they can make and the dominance they think they can have, right, in this industry, and how they're going from partners to rivals and competing for the same customers.
Totally. I mean, at the heart of it, I know I've mentioned a bunch of numbers at this portion, but at the heart of it is a very somewhat uh, philosophical debate, right? The current agreement that you asked about, it says Microsoft will relinquish its rights to OpenAI revenue and IP when OpenAI achieves AGI, artificial general intelligence. On there, one of the biggest debates that's happening now is the definition of AGI. Microsoft sees AGI as years away. OpenAI later see AGI as much closer. And if the moment they reach AGI is when the contract sort of clears up and the rights sort of are completely relinquished, you see why the debate happens. And so I think that's going to be another conversation that they're having. A little different than the antitrust conversation, but all in the same negotiation.
That's a lot wrapped up in one negotiation. Well, Natasha, thank you very much for joining us. That's Natasha Mascarenhas from The Information. And thanks to all of you for joining us as well for our Marketplace Tech Bytes Week in Review. Jesus Alvarado produced this episode, and I'm Nova Safo. We'll see you next time. This is APM.